We are live, and we want to welcome everyone to this, our second legislative wrap-up for 2020. And on behalf of the Gunster team, our chairman, Senator Lemieux, and managing shareholder Bill Perry, the board of directors, and all of the members of the Gunster Government Affairs Practice Group, we are pleased that you have chosen to join us this morning and taken the time out of your busy schedule to spend some time with us as we discuss the issues of importance that happened this past session. Last webinar, we were before the budget was signed, and now that the budget is signed and most of the bills have been signed, we're in a better position to talk about the budget and all of the things related with the budget. And so it is our pleasure to have with us Leader Audrey Gibson, and hopefully we'll also have Leader Kathleen Passidomo shortly. And I believe we have the senator now as well. And my teammate, Joanna Bonfanti, as we will discuss all of these issues with our Senate leaders here today. So let me walk us through where we left off, and then we will introduce our panelists more formally, and then begin to pepper them with questions. I just want everyone to know that if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature, type it in, and we will try to get to those questions as time progresses this morning. So the 2020 legislative session ended on March 22nd after being extended to complete a $93.2 billion budget deal. While each legislative session is unique, this session was particularly unusual, with the legislature attempting to craft a budget for the state while anticipating the impacts of a global pandemic on our tourism-based economy, our schools, and our healthcare system. With the state battling the fiscal impacts of COVID, Governor DeSantis made significant cuts, totaling $1 billion to the spending plan for fiscal year 2020-2021. DeSantis signed the $92.2 billion budget at the end of June, including $6.3 billion set aside in reserves and $350 million in tax relief. So join us for this conversation, and we hope that you remain engaged in this conversation. And as we mentioned before, please feel free to ask your questions as we move throughout using the Q&A box. So at this time, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Joanna, as she will make the first introduction.
Good morning, y'all. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Ron, for that introduction. I am going to be telling you a little bit about Leader Kathleen Passidomo. Senator Passidomo is the Republican leader from District 28, representing Collier, Hendry, and parts of Lee County. She served in the House of Representatives previously from 2010 to 2016, and she was first elected to the State Senate in 2016. Y'all, she has too many awards and recognitions to mention, but I will tell you that maybe something a little less known about Senator Passidomo by y'all listening in is that she is a fantastic cook and likes to share her love for Italian food and cooking with her colleagues in Tallahassee. And I wish we could see her smiling face this morning, but hopefully Senator Passidomo will be able to hear you just fine coming up in a minute. And I think what we'll do is now Ron will introduce Leader Gibson.
Thank you, Joanna, and it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend, Leader Audrey Gibson, my former seatmate in 2010, our last session together in the Florida House. So Leader Gibson was first elected to the Florida House in 2002 and served there until 2010. She represented the 15th district, which encompasses Jacksonville portion and portions of other portions of Duval County. And then she was elected to the Florida Senate in 2011. Leader Gibson is a wonderful human being, a fierce advocate for her community and for Floridians statewide. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Leader Gibson and join you, and thank you for joining us this morning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joanna with the first set of questions. But before we do that, I'm going to throw a little wrinkle here, and we'll give each of the leaders an opportunity to say hello before we go to the first question. So we'll start with Leader Passidomo, and then we'll end with Leader Gibson. Leader Passidomo?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I'm sorry that you can't see me, but you're not sorry you can't see me because I haven't had my hair done in a while. So maybe there is some justification for me not being able to get my iPad to pick you up. First, I want to say good morning to my good buddy, Senator Gibson. I hope you're having a good summer. And although I know we've all been doing the same, talking to constituents about unemployment all summer long, and I'm sure that'll come up in the discussion. Again, thank you for inviting me to participate.
Thank you. And now we'll turn it over to Senator Gibson.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation. I think that I'll have a few words with Senator Passidomo after, because I wanted to see your smiling face, and so I'm delighted to be with you all, actually, and hope you all are staying safe. I am, and it's the never-ending session, I think, right now. We laugh, but we haven't really left. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you both. So now I'll turn it over to Joanna with the first question.
Thanks, Ron. Senator Passidomo, this question, we'll start with you. And looking at the budget being signed with $1 billion in cuts, what would you say you think were some of the biggest successes of the 2020 legislative session? And where do you think y'all sort of fell short that you might see some of the bills coming back for next session?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I always look at our legislative sessions, as we all do, in light of the two main areas. One, of course, is the budget that you referenced, and I know we'll probably talk about that. We were successful up until the very end, and I think even through the end of session in terms of significant dollars for environment, teacher pay raises, and some really important things to our constituents. The second thing that we always look at is what kind of legislation we passed, what kind of initiatives did we pass that were important to our state. I drill it down to where my area of interest is, and as you know, and I think Senator Gibson and I share that, and that is our concern for our most vulnerable population, our elderly. I only did one bill this year, and it was a reform of Florida's guardianship law, and that came out of the horrific stories we heard in Orlando of a professional guardian who was routinely signing do not resuscitate orders for her wards when they actually didn't want that. And so, in fact, there were a couple of cases where people died and they didn't want to die. And so Representative Burton and I did pursue legislation to make it court order for do not resuscitate orders. The guardian can't just sign them routinely like they used to. And we put in some more protections in terms of appointments of guardians and the like. So I feel really good about that piece of legislation, and I hope that it will go as part of my initiatives over the past 10 years of how do we protect our most vulnerable population, who, in my opinion, are elderly.
Thank you, Senator. And so to continue with that same vein, Senator Gibson, so included in the budget were allocations for increases in teacher pay, affordable housing funds, $690 million for water quality and protection, and a large tax relief package. What made these items important to keep in the budget, and are there other things that probably should have been kept in the budget, or other things removed and replaced by other things? So just your thoughts on that. It's almost the same question as the previous, but an opportunity for you to chime in on the budget as well.
It's a little more loaded, I think. Sometimes, Representative, when you get home, sometimes you think, what was that? What did we do? Which bill did that bill make it? Did that not make it? So you're constantly all summer or spring trying to figure that part out. Obviously, the teacher pay is extremely important because we need more teachers. And we need to make sure that teachers can support themselves and their families. I think the only angst I had was we left off our more seasoned teachers, as well as school personnel, those assisting in the classrooms. They were left out, and certainly I hope that in the next budget cycle is going to be extremely tight, and I'm not sure we're going to get there to do what I think we should have done for our entire school system, including the teacher pay. I think obviously keeping the housing trust fund intact will certainly help us down the road. Right now, it may be a little tight in terms of building and lending money given the environment that we're in, but obviously the housing trust fund, keeping the housing trust fund whole allows for continual uninterrupted development of housing for the citizens in the state of Florida, and loans as well. I think your other part of your question, water quality, we have to continually keep our eye on that prize because we cannot exist without water. And the quality of that water is important, and the quality of our environment is important, period. Because I believe part of mental health has to do with being able to sit among the trees and along the brook sometimes. And so that is an important element in our budget. And I know that there was some people thought there was a cut let me back up to the trust fund, but it really wasn't. It was a replacement because of the state of emergency that we exist in. Mental health issues got a bump, which is good, because it's particularly in this time that we're living in now. So many people who are struggling with certain issues related to mental health go unnoticed. And during the pandemic, when we were still more stay at home, domestic abuse increased. There were more drug abuse calls. And so that part is going to be very critical as we come out of the pandemic someday. Today is not that day. I think, what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry.
No, I think you covered
tax package. I think, and year after year, most of the tax packages they don't trickle down, I don't think, very much to the average citizen. I would like to certainly see more job creation if we are going to continue to do large packages on tax cuts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joanna?
Senator Passidomo, in thinking about the phases of reopening that we're going through around the state with COVID-19, do you think there may be some legislation required to protect business owners from COVID-related litigation?
Absolutely, and that's a very good question. First of all, I wanted to mention it's not just that specific area in terms of business protection, but one of the things that I talked to Senator Simpson about is we need to have an actual standing committee, I believe, that will look at what happened during this pandemic. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? A soup to nuts sort of approach, almost like a 9/11 commission, because you take businesses in this this pandemic was something the state has never grappled with. There were a lot of things that occurred during the pandemic and that are still occurring, and it's all new, and there's no precedent. There's no we can't look back and say, well, when this occurred 10 years ago, this happened or that happened. And also the science keeps changing. So if a business is following the CDC guidelines, for example, and is operating under the most current information provided to it, they should not be held liable for something they had no control over or understanding of. So that's one thing. We need to look at the liability of our businesses. They should not be held liable unless they had active negligence. But I understand, and it's a little troubling that there are already seminars being put on by members of the trial bar on how to handle lawsuits against businesses in the pandemic. And I know for a fact that the first target are going to be the nursing homes, even though the governor has, basically that was one of the first things he did was shut them down. So getting back to, as we move out of this pandemic, and hopefully it will be sooner rather than later, we have to look at it from every perspective as to what happened, whether it be healthcare, whether it would be the economy, the issues with DEO, all those things that are coming to light now, we are going to have to address. And the reason I bring that up is that every time I've spoken to someone, I've been doing a lot of Zoom calls over the last couple of months. I have said to every business, every healthcare worker, everyone that has been on these calls, when we meet, when we get back in our committee weeks, and when we start talking about it, I want to hear, I think we all need to give our 2 cents as to what you've seen on the ground, in the trenches, in your community, what went right, what went wrong, and the end of the question was what kind of legislation should come out of this. Obviously, we're going to have to create some kind of framework in the future as to how this is going to be handled. The last thing I want to say about that is, and a lot of people don't appreciate as much, we're not in session this summer. We don't go back until after the election. And so under the Florida Constitution and Florida statute, the governor is basically in charge. And so we need to be able to give the governor the tools that the governor needs, no matter who the governor is, to address these issues. And so I think there will be some legislation. I hope we'll have a standing committee that will look at this over the next couple of years. And it's not just a healthcare pandemic. We may be faced in the future with all kinds of crises that we're going to need to address.
That's so true, Senator. We're already seeing the trial bar advertising pandemic lawsuits on the airwaves. So yeah, you're very correct about that. Ron, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Joanna. So picking right back up on where you all left off there. So Senator Gibson, you can chime in to add anything of what's on your mind to what the questions that Joanna asked, but also what implications do you think that this pandemic will have on the 2021 legislative session and future budgets? You alluded to it slightly, but not only from a budget perspective, there are other potential policy implications that our response to the pandemic may require. So with that, what are your thoughts?
And thank you very much. And so I wrote a note that called this the sinkhole question, because I thought about you never know where they really are. They'll just show up, and so this is kind of that arena. And let me first say that I've always been business friendly, but with an eye towards consumers as well. And I'm not going to point fingers at anybody, trial bar, but also there's ALEC that is developing legislation that deals with immunity. And so I thought about, in a perfect world, we would need insurance. We wouldn't need protection because the world would be perfect and everyone would be safe all the time. And that's not the world we live in. And so when we talk about immunity or what people know and when they know it, and how to protect people who are patronizing your business, it's more than just looking at one side or the other. I personally don't believe that the majority of our population looks for reasons to sue businesses. That's not who we are. And so I believe that businesses obviously have a duty to protect the people who patronize their business, and individuals have a responsibility to act in a safe manner as well. And so there's not one group of people or individual businesses that should be targeted. It's collectively, how do we live in a day-to-day environment, and how do we plan for situations that we have no control over, or that we do have some control over in a statewide manner to make sure that people are safe and continue to be safe. And so I look forward to the discussion, an inclusive discussion about how we protect people, as well as how businesses are able to protect themselves. If we're in a situation where we have to evolve day after day after day to figure out where we should be. One of the things that came to my mind too that we should look at in the protection of businesses is this whole idea of disaster insurance versus pandemic insurance. What is that? What should that look like in terms of, is a pandemic a disaster? Well, it's a disaster if your business is failing and you can't receive your customers, you can't get patronage, and you have to shut down altogether, or if we have to shut down, it ultimately impacts your business as a disaster would. And I think we should be looking at that as well for our businesses. The other part of your question, I'm sorry, because I have this. Let me tell you what, we can coexist. We can coexist. Business and community can coexist. And we have to look, if we're going to look at any legislation, it cannot detrimentally impact one community or the other. When I talk about community, business, or the community side. And that includes worker safety. When we know what we know, we can put a comma, if you will, and then make sure everything going forward is the way that it should be. I think you talked about the reopening.
So we're moving to the reopening next, but the final part of the question was, what impacts do you think it will have on the 2021 session? We already broadly talked about the impact on the budget that it's going to be. There is going to be some pressure with respect to that. But what impacts do you think on the legislative session from a policy perspective moving forward? I think Leader Passidomo mentioned creating a committee to sort of look at the response. I actually think that that's a thoughtful idea in terms of doing that. So what other ideas might be out there that could move the ball forward with respect to that?
Thank you. And I did have a note. I think that release of information related to a particular circumstance when it's first discovered, regardless of what agency it is, because my understanding is that cases of COVID-19 flared up before that information was released to the public. And we cannot hide information from our citizens, because then we know what to do or what steps to start taking. But when we don't find out that information until a month later, that agency or that entity of the state has endangered the lives of everyone. And so any legislation should require that when a situation is discovered, it must be immediately reported to public health officials, to the governor, so that information can then start to be released to the general public, and we can take steps to protect ourselves and our community. And so in terms of the budget for next year, well, it's going to be tight. I think those projects ultimately that were cut this year will not be able to be funded next year. We're going to need to help our schools, particularly as it relates to facilities and the charter sharing. And if there's no millage rate increases in our localities, then we have a problem. And tourism has not picked up to where it needs to be, and we are a tourist state. And so I believe a special session may happen after the November elections, because we have good reserves, but we cannot operate a state on reserves. Thank you.
Thank you. And so now we're going to transition the conversation a little bit to looking at the state response and then reopening the state. And as we do that, we're going to remind our audience that if you have questions that you would like us to ask, please feel free to use the Q&A feature or button to type those questions in. And look, you have two leaders of the Senate available, so you don't get this opportunity every day. So feel free to ask those questions. So Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ron. Before we move on to that next phase of the conversation, I had a thought while Leader Gibson was talking that I just wanted to explore a little bit, if you'll bear with me, Ron. In terms of the state budget, there could be some opportunities that we're leaving on the table when it comes to revenue. And Leader Passidomo, I was thinking about that in terms of potentially a compact moving forward. What are your thoughts? Is this potentially a year when something like that could happen or come to fruition? The focus by so many in leadership is, and many of our citizens feel very strongly about not having a state income tax. So setting aside the idea of raising taxes, where do you think there might be some opportunities to go collect revenue that's being left on the table?
That's a great question. Couple of things. From a bird's eye perspective, obviously we're thinking a lot about where we're going to be with the budget over the next couple of years. First of all, for the fiscal year for the budget we just passed, the governor reduced by $1 billion. We feel comfortable at this point between the reserves and our projections that will be something that we can get through. Funding from the CARES Act has helped. Federal funding that we've received will help. And so at least for the budget that we have, I'm hopeful and I feel confident we will not have to go back into session after November to amend that budget. Of course, you can never say never, but I think I feel comfortable where we are in that. Moving forward, it is going to get tight in the 2021, 22, and forward budget. Different than it was in 2008 when we had an economic downturn. We're not really having an economic downturn like we did in 2008. It's people want to work, there are jobs available, but they can't get to them because we've closed a lot of businesses. So we can talk about that in a minute. But with regard to the budget, we're going to have to go back into the base budget and start looking at what we have been funding and whether we need to continue to do that. And I've actually been saying that for years, that and this is not member projects. Member projects are one thing. Usually they're one and done or whatever, but we have all kinds of programs that we've been funding in our state budget for 10, 15, 20 years that are like sacred cows that may need to be looked at in terms of how do we combine some programs, how do we look at it from a global perspective, a statewide perspective. I think that's something we're going to have to do. The compact that you mentioned is important. We left $600 million on the table by not being able to complete the compact with the Indians, with the Seminoles. I know that that's something that is important to us, and I believe it's something that Senator Simpson is concerned about and wants to work on. The idea of a state income tax is a definite non-starter for my caucus, and I would assume that as well, Senator Gibson's caucus would be cautious about that as well, because the fact that we don't have a state income tax is what brings a lot of people to Florida, and move to Florida, to retire in Florida, to bring their wealth to Florida and to spend it here. So we're gonna probably have to really take a deep dive into our budget, our state budget, in the years to come, and be fiscally lean and mean.
It's so true. Thank you for your thoughtful answers on that question.
right, thank you. So moving to the state response to COVID and reopening the state. So we're going to first talk about education, as we know that that's a hot topic with respect to, what's the right approach, what's the right thing to do, and all of that. So Florida Education Commissioner Corcoran has stated two main goals as we prepare for the next school year. To keep the education community safe and to eliminate the achievement gap for students that had a difficult time transitioning to virtual learning. And we know that that is going to be in the mix for many students this upcoming school year. So as we look to the reopening of schools, what are the things that need to happen from the education department to ensure public trust in reopening schools? And then in thinking about that and thinking for even next session, will there be special funding to ensure that schools can adhere to the CDC guidelines, or for keeping campuses clean? Some of those funding may be available via federal dollars for that. So we'll stop right there with that question, and we'll start with Senator Gibson on that one.
Thank you so much. And let me just back up a second about how we budget. So I think it was under Governor Bush, we did zero-based budgeting, and every single item starts at zero, and then we start to look at what are the functions of those things. And while that is not necessarily leaving revenue on the table, it is looking at our spending. And so I agree that those things that do not serve a public purpose and enrich our community should be certainly reviewed, and that's a place to start. The compact, obviously, it would give us revenue, but it has to be something that's going to be beneficial to the entire state of Florida as well. And so we have to look at what are we giving up as a state or not in terms of the compact. And so on to the school reopenings. As I said in a statement and a press conference that we had even before that, is parents are not feeling like their kids will be safe going back with the numbers in particular as high as they are across the state. So I'm certainly pleased that those school boards who are independently elected have decided for their students that they needed to push back that time. And the CDC recommends downward trajectory of 14 days and 5% or less positivity rate. And until that happens, we need to ensure that all of our children have access to digital learning or virtual learning, because there's some myth that kids can't contract COVID-19. And then that would then go along with the myth that they can't spread COVID-19. That is not a good assumption. And many of our kids live in multi-generational families. That's an issue, as well as our teachers and school personnel. Not everybody is 21. And so we have individuals who have underlying conditions. It is just not safe to run blindly into reopening our schools when we can provide for those kids, as we did on the shutdown, to make sure that the numbers go down like they should. Today, we're at 12,000 new cases. No. And so the other part of the downward trajectory that I talked about and the caucus talked about is the 14 days, but county by county, right? So that obviously we're a connected state, but individual decisions can be made based on what's happening in that particular community. And that's the way I think we go forward with reopening our schools, and actually is the way we should have gone forward in phases as well. And I think we should take a step back to safety on that.
Okay, thank you. Joanna?
Sure, thank you, Ron. Continuing on the education theme, Senator Passidomo, one focus that I think sometimes people may not always think about is the early learning conversation and our youngest little learners. And as a mom of a rising kindergartner, I know this question is definitely important to me. It's one that's been posed by an audience member, but how will early learning programs be included in these conversations, since much of what they do is not school district focused, it's its own entity, if you will?
Let me address sort of the whole, at least my thoughts on school reopening and the like. I think we have to use common sense here. And we have to look at it from everybody's perspective, starting with the students, of course. There's so much discussion about, we have to open the schools, and I think there's a lot of discussion, just everything has to be open. First of all, I firmly believe that the local communities should be making those decisions because our state is so diverse. There are some areas in the state which have very little COVID issues, and if those school districts in those areas want to open fully, they should do that. Obviously, all the safety issues, the CDC guidelines, and even maybe some, as science changes and, we hear more in terms of whether, students, whether they could get the COVID or transmit the COVID. All those things keep coming up. We keep hearing different things. So we have to use common sense, allowing the local districts to weigh in on it. And I think that is occurring. Secondly, and something that is troubling to me, when I read letters to the editor and when I hear from parents and teachers who are concerned, valid concerns about students going back to school, but nobody is speaking for the families where there is nothing else. We have students that go to school because they get breakfast and lunch, and how are we going to take care of those kids? We have parents who are working in essential service positions, not just the medical community, but throughout our state. There are essential service workers who need to work. They can't stay home. They can't afford it. And I hear stories of 9-year-olds at home doing their computer classwork. How many 9-year-olds are that disciplined to spend all day going to school online? So I think we have to start looking about how we can get kids back to school safely, because what I'm worried about is there are a lot of wealthier parents that are hiring teachers to come in, and they're creating little mini classrooms. And that's leaving behind the kids whose parents can't do that. We've got to start thinking about how we can safely open the schools for those kids that need to learn, because I love distance learning. My kids all took online classes, but they were in school and that was monitored and managed. I don't think we know what happened, what the kids that were in school virtually, because none of them were in the classroom from March to the end of the school year, they haven't been tested, so we have no idea what they've learned or if they've learned anything at all. So we have to use some common sense. We have to let the school districts manage it. We can't just say, don't open. There are some teachers that want to go back in the classrooms. There are some that can't go back in the classrooms. I think if we let the local districts have those conversations with their employees, come up with a plan, follow the guidelines, but allow these kids who would be sitting at home by themselves be in school. And so that gets into the, the pre-K and the like. A lot of them have been going to school because they've had some of those programs open all summer. So, and they seem to have been handling it pretty well. I think if we take a look at how they've handled it, that might be a good, something good for us to look at as well.
Thank you, Leader Passidomo. So there's a couple of other agencies that have been in the spotlight as a result of COVID, and so we're going to shift gears a little bit here. And just to remind everyone, it is currently 10:17, and the webinar ends at 10:30. So it seems like we can go on for a couple of hours, considering the number of issues that are on the table for our state. So I'm going to go through a couple of these things so that both of you can think about these issues. So close to 2 million unemployment claims have been filed in the state of Florida during this time. The Department of Economic Opportunity has taken criticism for the claim process and benefits payout process. What can be done to ensure that Floridians who have lost their jobs due to the pandemic are receiving aid from the state of Florida? And so we know that there are some layers that are associated with the federal government with that as well. So that's a factor in it as well. What steps can the legislature take to increase the efficiency of the process? So we'll start with Senator Gibson on this one.
Thank you. I'm gonna start with with your last question about efficiency, and the first thing we need to do is hire a couple of trucks with trailers and haul the whole system off. That's number one. We need to, if we invested in a system that works, and I know across the country there were some issues because of the number of people applying for unemployment. But the first issue is the function of the system itself. And so while we'd like to think that unemployment will always be low, it won't necessarily happen because, again, we don't live in a perfect world. And so we should be able as a state to process more, have a look at a contract or system that, and I'm not a computer geek, that has, I don't know if there's expansion capacity or if there's flexibility built in, but certainly a system that can accommodate more than the number that could have been that this system that we currently have was built to accommodate, because unemployment comp is not a giveaway, right? People were actually working, and when they're in distress, then certainly they are entitled to be able to support themselves to the extent possible, which we also need to increase our unemployment rate, by the way. So in terms of, I don't know if that's obviously that's a legislative issue, but it's a budget issue as well. And within the legislative component, that's the language, increasing the the rate, as well as looking at the look back period. So we did it. We went through the processes that are laid out in statute now as to how many months you have to look back. And I think people who were applying in March, what did they have to go back to? I think it was October of 2018, right? So let's say your salary fluctuated, or you made more at a given, more in the beginning and less in the end, or vice versa. So your benefits are, I think someone was a teacher, she's a teacher, because of the length of time that she taught. And by the time you divide that by this and that, she was at $91. $91. Who can live on $91 every 2 weeks? So those things I think we need to look at.
Thank you. Joanna?
Thank you, Ron. In thinking about another agency and the active role they've played in the reopening and response, DBPR recently prohibited the on-premise consumption of alcohol at bars. And these are businesses that derive more than 50% of their gross revenue from the sale of alcoholic beverages. Senator Passidomo, do you think that this step is helping to effectively decrease COVID-19 cases? And what are your thoughts on whether DBPR should take more or less steps to enforce compliance with statewide orders like these?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So obviously the fact that the bars are closed is not making much of a difference because the case numbers are going up. What it really comes down to is personal responsibility. And I know we hear about that all the time, but we have people all over the state who really aren't considering the effect that they have on others. How many times do we hear about COVID parties? They're still occurring. People are still gathering without social distancing, without masks. And yes, I think everyone should wear a mask. I wear a mask. I tell my constituents to wear a mask. I have a husband who has immune deficiency, and I'm the sole caregiver of a 97-year-old dad and a 95-year-old mom. And I would be devastated if they caught COVID because of something I did. So I wear a mask, and I tell people to wear a mask. Everybody's talking about, those are the things we all need to do. Whether the bars are open or closed, that's not the issue. The issue is how people react when they go to these places. So it's unfortunate that if we do say, okay, open all the bars, but we've got to say wear a mask. How are we going to enforce that? It has to be something where we all are in this together and we all agree on it. I talk to family members all over the country, and by and large, they're in states whether they have a mask or ordinance or mandate or not, people are taking personal responsibility. And I don't understand why people in Florida are not. I think we're just a different state. So, whether the bars are open or closed, if at some point government makes a decision to reopen them, there has to be a mechanism for people to comply with the CDC guidelines, because until we do that, I don't see this pandemic lessening. And I think that's an important thing to note. And those people, and we have them in Collier County, I read about them in the paper all the time, who are saying that the pandemic's a hoax. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense. So we're just going to have to educate people. We're going to have to keep telling them how important it is. I am glad that the president is now saying, yes, it's important to wear masks. And I have heard the governor say the same thing. Whether a mandate's in place or not, it doesn't do any good if people don't pay attention to it. So that's really how, that's really where we need to go. That's where we need to be. It's not a question of opening or closing. It's a question of people taking on the responsibility. If we're going to open the economy, then let's do it right. Let's do it safely, and let's care about the people that we deal with.
Thank you, Senator Passidomo. So I'm going to throw out a question for both of you, as we have 4 minutes left, and you could answer this question and then also include your wrap-up comments in it. So we are in hurricane season, and there are a lot of lessons that could be learned from the ongoing pandemic, and how we as a state should prepare for a hurricane during the pandemic. And I'm also going to throw another wrinkle in that. As a former commissioner at the PSC, most of the utilities have sort of given their clients an opportunity that if they are unable to pay, they won't shut them off. So that creates a lot of bad debt. And as a result of that, there is going to be some financial reckoning at some day as a result of the accumulating bad debt, and when you consider the preparations that need to come into place for a hurricane. So do you think the PSC has the tools necessary to handle both of these crises, or potential crises at the same time, considering the potential economic impact that it can have on these companies and customers across the board? So we'll start with Senator Gibson, and then we'll close out with Senator Passidomo.
Well, really quickly, so our local utility was giving leniency on utility bills. Now they have moved towards disconnection, but they're also taking payment arrangements. So I've encouraged people in my community to call, because whatever you can pay obviously helps to mitigate for that debt that you mentioned. Not totally, but it gives the entity an opportunity to start collecting, but it also gives that customer an opportunity to keep the lights on, which is important. And so, in terms of what the PSC can handle, maybe that's a question. Maybe that's an answer. You can tell us what needs to be done. And with hurricane season, we have to we're going to have to plan in multiple ways. It seems like every year we learn something. Every time we have a hurricane, we learn something to take with us to the next time, like making sure we have pet shelters, making sure we have, which became an issue here in Duval, shelters for those who require continual medication. They may have mental health issues. And they need to be in a separate facility to make sure that their medication is being administered and that kind of thing. Shelters for those who are disabled. And so we're going to have to continue the testing, but probably temperature checks into any shelters that we have, make sure there's social distancing. We need to figure out then, if that's the case, do we need more? Do we need to make sure we identify more shelters? Because it's an entire plan alongside of our existing plan. But we have to be able to make sure that people are accommodated and safe. And is this my wrap up too?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. And so thank you for having me. I just would leave you with the step back to safety that I mentioned. I do believe in common sense, as our leader, Passidomo, mentioned, but I also believe in science. And to get us out of where we are, because we don't know when most of the testing was done. So we're not sure if the numbers we're seeing were a month ago or 2 weeks ago, because there's multiple types of testing going on. And so I say step back to safety, which would be go back to phase 1 at 25% capacity. We can't necessarily track the bars and say that's the issue, but we know that when we were in 25% capacity, we did not have the issues that we have today in terms of the numbers. And that is county by county, as I mentioned earlier, because I did mention that every area is different and they need to make their adjustment to keep their community safe. Thank you so very much for having me today.
Thank you, Senator Gibson. Senator Passidomo?
Well, I obviously don't have time to answer the question because dealing with what's going to happen if there's a hurricane is another hour's worth of discussion.
True.
So we'll come back. But I want to thank you for allowing me to participate, asking me to participate. I always enjoy conversations with Senator Gibson, even though I can't see you and you can't see me, but it's good because, again, my gray hairs are sticking out. Looking forward to getting back in November and looking forward to hearing from you all about how you feel we are doing in the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanna, closing comments from you?
I just enjoyed this conversation so much with both of you. Thank you all for joining us and for the opportunity to get a little insight from you both. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Joanna. And we want to thank everyone who joined us this morning for this conversation. Just want everyone to know that you can rewatch or you can watch a recording of this on our website. It will be posted in about 24 hours. And so feel free to direct people to our website so they could catch this webinar if they were unable to view it live with us this morning. Leaders Gibson and Passidomo, thank you for your time this morning. Continue to stay safe, and thank you for your service to our state. All right, with that, we are going to sign off shortly. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.